Thank you all for being here. Our speaker tonight is Luther Olsen. Thank you for joining us, Luther. And we're going to take about 30 minutes. He wanted to do this a little bit more organically, so thank you all for the questions that you sent in. They are absolutely fabulous. And Rich is going to mute everyone. If we had about 25 questions come in. And so what I've done is I've gone through, like we do for our forums, and I have combined the questions that are very similar. It's like we had 7 alone on redistricting because you're all good leaguers. So I'm going to go through this list. We got some questions in late this afternoon that are also good. And Maria, thank you for all of your questions. If you think you want to ask a question, at the bottom of the screen is a chat function. And I would say, instead of sending it to everyone, send it to me. And I will try, depending upon the topic, we'll try to slide it in if it is a topic that is pertinent and is germane to what Luther's role was at the state legislature. And if it's a different, basically other than gerrymandering, because we have 7 of those. So I'm going to try to combine those, and we will get going. You ready, Luther?
I'm muting you. I'm muting everybody. So Luther, you'll want to unmute, and Ellen as well.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So ready, Luther?
I'm ready.
Okay. There are examples within the United States, most notably Iowa, and I'm going to go back and say the League of Women Voters has had a nearly 50-year position on redistricting, and we like the Iowa model. These are a nonpartisan agency draws the voting maps after the census. Those maps are then submitted to the legislature for final approval. They use retired judges on their nonpartisan agency. Those maps, after they're submitted to the legislature for final approval, do you think that that process could work here in Wisconsin? And it is worth noting that the Republicans do control the legislature and the governor's office in Iowa. And if you don't think this approach could work, why do you think it can't work?
Sure, any approach could work. That would work fine. Will it happen? I doubt it, but it could work, as it works in Iowa.
It has worked for decades in Iowa. So, okay, let me do another follow-up question on that. According to press reports, leaders of the Republican Party here in the legislature hired and were making taxpayer-funded payments to an out-of-state legal firm that would contest a potential veto of Republican-drawn voting maps by Governor Evers, a Democrat. We have split government, and we're going to probably talk about that quite a bit yet tonight. A majority of Wisconsin voters, and this is based on a Marquette Law School poll, want these maps drawn through a nonpartisan approach. Why are these Republican leaders spending tax dollars to oppose something that has not even taken place?
I don't know. I'm not there, but I would guess that they've seen what happens when you have split government. And so what will happen is they'll draw a map. The governor will veto it, and then it'll go to court, and some judges will determine what the new maps look like. That happens when there's split government. And so I assume they're just getting a law firm in place to defend their maps in front of the judges, but it seems like it's a little early in my mind.
So they weren't working on this while you were still in office?
No.
Okay. So here's another question. Why, first of all, why, there's going to be 2 parts. Why did you retire? Not that there's anything wrong with retirement. I love it. But When and why did working in Madison become all about winning among parties and stop being to do what's best for the people? Because we have a representative form of government. And many times our elected officials aren't listening to their constituents. So it seems to become a more of a personal issue for the elected officials than listening to constituents and wanting to do what constituents are asking.
Okay, why did I retire? I was there 26 years. I never thought I'd be there that long. I was 10 in the Assembly and 16 in the Senate. And one day I was thinking, you know, if I ran again, I would probably win. And 2 months after I got sworn in, I turned 70 years old. I thought, why in the world do I want to do this when I'm 70 years old? I'd sort of like to retire and enjoy life, even though I was enjoying life. And you get to a point in your career, and I've said this, when personally and professionally time to retire matches, it's a good thing. And that's the way it was with me. It was professionally, it was time to go. And personally, it was time to go. As far as winning, it's always been that. If you look at the history of our government, it's always winner take all. And one of the things that I learned when I got first elected, because I was on the school board in Berlin, I was nonpartisan. I didn't know anything about partisan politics. But whoever is in the majority really runs the show. And so there's lots of energy and money put into elections to make sure that one party or the other is in the majority, because they set the calendar, they set the bills that are coming up. They really are responsible for government. And if you're in the minority, and I remember my mentor when I first got elected, we were walking down the street and he was in the minority before I got there. And then we took the majority when I got elected. He said, in partisan politics, when you're in the majority, you're responsible for government. And when you're in the minority, it's just an honor to be there. And that's the way it is.
Well, yeah, thanks for that answer. It's a little cynical because as a history major, as well as a politics and government major, that's not how our government was formed.
No, but that's how it turned out.
What?
That's how it turned out.
That's how it's turned out, but this is relatively recent since the Eisenhower era, because Eisenhower and Kennedy were not that different. So there has been a sort of evolution among the legislators that it has become this power thing instead of doing, I mean, you illustrated exactly what is wrong and why they are not doing what's best for the people. They are doing what is best for their party.
See, what Ellen, the way you get the most bipartisan action is when you have split government. And we sort of have it now with Governor Evers and the Republicans, but not really. But when I remember when I was in the Assembly, we had the Republicans controlled the Assembly and the Democrats controlled the Senate. And they worked together to come up with W-2. You know, they worked together because they had to. You couldn't get anything done without it.
Yep.
But when you run the show, you don't really need the other side. And so that's what happens. I remember when there was one term, the Democrats had majority in both houses and Governor Doyle was governor. And they ran the show. I mean, I had good bills, but never got anything done because they didn't need me. When you need to pass something, then and you don't have enough horses in your stable, then you got to go to the other stable and work with them. And that's when you get the most bipartisanship.
So here's another question submitted by a member. In a lame duck session, the legislator stripped the governor and the attorney general of powers that had been allowed them under Scott Walker's term. Is there a precedent for that behavior? Because it seems to me that we've lost track of the constitutional authority of the legislature and the constitutional authority that is given the attorney general as well as the governor. And again, we have you're talking about split government. So why can't the legislator work with a governor that was elected from a statewide vote instead of a district vote?
So what happened back then when you have the governor of your party and you have the majority of both houses, what happens a lot of times is you cede power to the governor. And I remember telling my colleagues, don't be giving Walker this power, because someday he's not going to be governor and you're going to be not happy with if a Democrat is the governor, because you gave him a lot of our power away. Oh, no. I never thought about that. And how do you tell your governor no? And so what happened there is a bunch of that power we took back that we had given him, and also took more power away than we had given Walker. One of the things with the attorney general we were concerned would happen is a thing called sue and settle, where people would sue the state to undo some things, and the attorney general would just say, okay, we'll settle with you and we won't fight it. And they were concerned about that. So they said, okay, we're not going to let you just sue and settle. We're going to put some restrictions on the kind of settlements you can do, because we don't want you giving away the farm on stuff that we had passed, because people would sue and say, well, this is unconstitutional, because, unless the law is unconstitutional, it's the law. And they were concerned that he would say, yep, you're right, it's unconstitutional, now the law is gone and you couldn't do anything about it.
Okay, I'm going to change a little bit. We have some questions here on public education, and we know that that was an area of specialty for you. Public education has long been the bedrock of our educational system here in Wisconsin. You and I have had many conversations about that. In recent years, the Republican Party has championed transferring taxpayer funds away from public education to support a growing voucher program. This has left school districts throughout the state short of funds. Why have you, and I'm going to say League has a position in opposition to this. We do not agree with vouchers. So why have you supported this?
Well, I think the thing about it is I've always fought for public education, as my track record shows. The problem that we had, and the way it started out with, is mostly, as you know, out of Milwaukee, where if you had any money, you pulled your kids out of MPS and sent them to a private school, or you moved out of there and went to a suburb school that was doing a better job.
Mm-hmm.
And back when, the lady who really pushed it was a Democrat, Polly Williams, said, this isn't fair, because I've got a bunch of Black little kids that are not getting a good education here. And Howard Fuller at that time was the superintendent in MPS, Milwaukee Public School System. And he said, I got some terrible schools here. And so he pushed for poor kids to give them the same opportunity that parents with wealth could go to a private school, because they didn't have any money to go. So it started out, I think it was like 180 kids, and you had to, it was 100 and some percent of poverty. And like anything in life, it just expanded, and it expanded in Milwaukee, and then it expanded in Racine and Green Bay, and then it went statewide, because people said, hey, if we're good enough for them, we want that opportunity. So I've always said the problem is we don't have enough money for 2 school systems, and that's what sort of happening here. I know that there was a push to go to 300% of poverty, which covered just about every kid in the state. And I fought that tooth and nail, and it never went there. But I believe if a Republican was governor, they would push that, and it would be anybody could go to a private school and the state would pay for it. But what was happening, and really what was happening back then, the way it started is that those kids were stuck in and not graduating and not doing a good job, and the private schools were doing better. And people, and I talked to superintendents, like not fair and it's not equal and all that stuff, but that's the way it happened.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. I think that many times this legislature, well, the legislature does treat Milwaukee County differently, and it should. But some of those things maybe shouldn't go beyond the specific challenges of Milwaukee County, because DHS, the state DHS is in Milwaukee County. They have different needs than the rest of the state, but we do have a couple follow-up questions.
Sure.
So do you feel that teachers at voucher schools should be required to be licensed and have the same certifications like public school teachers are?
Yeah, yes and no. I guess the question, the thing that you have to remember with private schools is nobody has to go there. You have to go to a public school. That's the law. You gotta, kids, if you're living in Ripon, unless you're homeschooled or going to private, you've got to go to Ripon, to the public school, where parents have a right to say, I tried this school, I don't like it. Those schools have to give the same tests that the public schools do. So they have a report card and they have a test and things like that. And from what I understand, the private schools license their teachers and do all that stuff. They want licensed teachers. You can't really run a school nowadays that I know of and expect kids to go there and parents to send their kids if you don't have a licensed teacher. Even though it's interesting because now it's the state level, we have life licenses. You don't have to get them renewed. You just, once you got your license, you're licensed for good.
Yeah, okay, we have a couple follow-up questions. Actually, 2 of these questions are actually the same. So the question becomes, then why don't we work harder to improve public education? Because what you are saying and what we agree with is we have a bifurcation of our education systems. So what is the problem with the legislatively allowing schools to have improve?
Well, I worked on that for my whole career. You don't want the legislature working to improve education because we're not educators. I served on a committee for the National Conference of State Legislators, and we studied international education. We got a grant and we studied what other countries are doing and why they're successful on the PISA exam. The PISA exam is a worldwide test that tests a bunch of kids at certain grades. And what we did is said, let's go visit these countries that do very, very well on the PISA exam. And so we studied all kinds of different countries, and we spent a week or better in China and looked at what was going on. And we wrote a paper on it called No Time to Lose. And it really said, here are some things that schools in the United States need to do. One of them was, we really need high quality teachers. You got to pay them well. You've got to have great pre-service. And over there, they had large class sizes so they could, we have gone down the small class size, not making teaching as difficult as they do. And we asked them, where did you get all these ideas? And he said, oh, from you guys, from your universities. This is the research that we do, but we don't give it to them, or we don't use it ourselves. So the question is, why is it hard to improve education? You talk about racial diversity, and racism and diversity and inclusion, and schools get beat up on that and all this stuff. I think what has happened is I think education has improved. The problem is the kids coming to school now have more poverty, more single parents, more issues when they come to school. So even if you're staying the same, you're probably pedaling harder because the kids walking in the door have more issues than you've ever had before. And so that's a great question. Why doesn't public education improve in the United States? I always said there's no competition. There sort of is. I remember when Spence Corte was superintendent in Milwaukee, I was talking to him after I think it was a State of the State one night in the rotunda, and we were talking about choice, and he said, I'm really sort of glad choice is in Milwaukee because now we have competition, and now because we can lose kids, and when I call a meeting of our staff, they will show up, because otherwise it's like, well, we got a job, our numbers are good, and so whatever. And he said, this will jack us up a little bit to do better, but he's gone.
Okay, well, we have some other follow-up questions, but I'm gonna move on because we have other topics.
Sure.
So I'm gonna combine two questions on this. Your opinions have been and continue to matter to voters. You were a popular senator. Given that, is Joe Biden the legally elected president of the United States? And then the follow-up is, what happened on January 6th in Washington, D.C. at the US Capitol? How would you describe what took place on that date? So is Joe Biden our president? And what do you think happened on January 6th?
Yes, of course, he's our president.
Thank you.
In fact, it was funny because the press said something, and they did a poll of legislators, and I was one of the only Republicans to answer. And I said, is he the president-elect? And I said, yes, he is, in my mind, unless they come up with something that, is different, but he is. What happened on January 6th, in my mind, was pathetic. Totally. It made me sick. People just nuts.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we can come to consensus on that. Here's another question. What do you think about, and do you support the bills going through the legislature that are working to suppress voter access to the polls?
I'm glad you brought that question up. One of my good friends in the Senate is Senator Rob Coles, who is the co-chair of the audit committee, and they're doing a big audit on the election. In fact, I talked to him the other day about it, and he's really mad that they're taking these bills up, because he said, let's do the audit and find out if there's any areas that need to be tightened up, if there's anything that wasn't working right. But of course, they can't wait for that, because I guess they had a pretty ugly caucus the other day, because these bills, they're mad at this Senator Bernier for taking her time and working on those bills, and the authors want them jammed through because they're getting all kinds of pressure from their districts, from people saying, you got to fix this because the election was stolen. I mean, they believe it, and rather than just saying to those guys, listen, we're doing an audit, we're studying this, these guys will come back and say, no, nothing needs to be fixed, or here's some areas that you need to fix, and then pass some bills. So they got the cart before the horse, but it's all political pressure by folks that represents that some of these guys are representing.
Okay. It's sad because Rob Coles is a very moderate, he could roll Democrat or Republican.
Well,
and I've worked with him.
The joke of it is he used to be ultra conservative. Now the whole thing has changed and he's moderate and he hasn't changed.
Yeah, because when I was in Brown County, I worked with him on a few things and he would listen, which is all you can expect.
Yeah.
So because we're running out of time, I have two final questions for you. The first one, I think what all of us want to know, because we do advocate many times, and you and I have a discussion about what the league is all about. And I told you we are nonpartisan. You disagree with that, but we are nonpartisan. We are policy oriented. And so we're very astute when it comes to policy. But what we would like from you is to know how, if we can be a help in facilitating building relationships across the aisle. Do you see that as a possibility?
I'd like to say yes, but the answer is no. And the thing about it is, if you look at the legislature, I've been thinking about this a lot since I retired, even when I was there, is reflecting the citizens of our state and our country. The ends are going farther and farther apart, and people don't want to meet in the middle. And so it's winner take all. It used to be, I remember listening to a speech by some guy from Washington. He said, compromise is the grease of democracy. Mm-hmm. That's what makes the wheels turn. And that's why they're not turning. If you look at, government is not working because people have gotten in their camps and stayed there. And one of the things that concerns me about the lack of compromise is people who are afraid to compromise usually don't know that much. And they're afraid, the reason I say that, they're afraid that somebody's going to eat their lunch. And so it's like, okay, rather than getting together and coming up with a solution, then if they do, then there's somebody on the left or the right saying, well, they ate your lunch. You didn't know what you were doing and you gave in and, and you're a weak sister. So I was talking to somebody the other day and we were trying to figure out when is this going to change? And I don't know when it's going to change. Because we have talk radio, we got cable news, we got the internet, everybody is not afraid to shoot their mouth off. And if you look at the nasty stuff that people are saying, it was sort of interesting. I'm getting into something you don't want to, but I look at Facebook and somebody says something and then I sort of read the comments and some of them are just vile. So I would press, not a creeper, but I press the thing of the person who said that. And usually I pick women and find out, let me see what your background, what your Facebook page is. And what they're saying does not fit their Facebook persona. And I'm thinking, why would you say this kind of stuff when you're a grandmother or you're a young mother and you got nice kids and all this stuff, but the stuff that you spew on Facebook is toxic. And that's what's happening with our country, is with all this stuff. Just for example, I've been consulting with these guys that did a study on saying should schools would save $50 million if they went into the state insurance pool. And there was an article in the Northwestern about it, and it talked about that WEAC Insurance said, they supported it. The nasty comments about the study and WEAC and the whole 9 yards, I thought, guys, had nothing to do with it. This was a grant that these guys got. It's real research, but people just went nuts. And I thought, oh God, you guys, you're sick. But can I go, you got one more thing, and I want to go to redistricting in just a second, okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, one of the problems, and people are saying, well, we want fair maps. And what is the definition of a fair map? The problem, and I listened to a webinar out of Marquette where these guys, that professors that do, redistricting studies and all that stuff. And one of the big problems is in Wisconsin is we have Democrats so
Consolidated
in Madison and Milwaukee, that if you were going to have any kind of a chance of a map that would, and they said you can't even draw a map that would not give Republicans the majority by at least 5 votes in the assembly, but you would have such long gerrymandered ugly maps to dilute Dane County. It would go way out into the state just to dilute those votes so that they're not, I think I read the superintendent of public instruction got 80% of the vote in Dane County. I mean, that is the problem that we have in Wisconsin, that when you have such hotspots of Democrats in 2 big cities, the maps would be, they would look like octopuses.
Well, that's not true, Luther. I don't know what you're reading, but when we look at it, and I worked on the census committee, is that right now the Republicans have packed those so that the Democrats can have, of course you're going to have more Republicans because they're packed to the Democrats. Dane County as a whole, Milwaukee County as a whole are very different than senatorial districts or assembly districts. A county votes a specific, I staffed redistricting several times while I worked in county government. And so it's apples and oranges. And having worked with the US Census this year too, on the premise that we want to count everyone who has not been counted. The fact is that I think you're reading something very different than I have read over the 30 years that I have worked in this area. So yes, you do have conclaves of Democrats in Dane County and Milwaukee County because the Republican redistricting in 2010 packed it that way. That's why you don't have to gerrymander we're saying as a league, you don't gerrymander anything, nothing is gerrymandered. The districts are drawn by geography and by community. Now, was I tempted to try to gerrymander Guy Zima out of his district at the county level? You betcha. Nobody let me do it, but it can be done. But what the league stands for and has stood for 50 years is no gerrymandering. We don't want Democrats to gerrymander and we don't want Republicans to gerrymander.
It'll be interesting to see what the governor's commission comes up with for a map, because they're saying, I think what you're saying, and it'll be real interesting to see what they came up with. But if you were to do that, you would have a bunch of, well, take John Erpenbach, he would just be Dane County, he wouldn't go up to Portage and all that stuff. But you're right, Republicans overdid it. They with computers now, you can do it just and so they did it so much. It's sort of like I remember I had a lady come in my office years and years ago about redistricting, and she was saying, well, we got to change this. And I said, I don't see this getting less, I see it getting more. And I said, it reminds me of when I was a kid, we'd go to a tractor pull and farmers would bring their tractors in and maybe they'd turn the tires around and stuff. Now you have tractors with jet engines and 5 motors. And I sort of say it's the same thing with redistricting. It has become more powerful, not less powerful.
Yeah.
And we'll see what the court does in this new map that they come up with for Wisconsin, if they don't like it. But the thing, so what you're saying is just do contiguous areas and don't even look at politics.
Right. We believe that you do not set districts by politics. You set districts by geographical location, bodies of water. The Supreme Court has ruled culturally, but not politically. That's the lead position.
I assume if Tony's people are true to their cause, they will do that. If they're not, you will see gerrymandered districts the other way. So we'll see. Proof will be in the pudding on what they come up with.
And that's what we're afraid of. We just want districts that are not drawn based on political affiliation.
Yeah.
We want them drawn the way that they should be drawn, which is based on culture and geography.
Well, culture isn't one of the things that you do it on.
Well, the Supreme Court has been ruling.
It's race.
Yeah.
And contiguous, can't have islands, and they have to have the same numbers.
So I'll say race instead of culture.
Right. Yeah, you can't marginalize. Yeah.
Right.
Good.
Okay, so here's the last question.
Okay.
You were in the legislature for 26 years. What surprised you the most during that tenure?
The partisanship. When I went there, I remember I gave stupid speeches when I was in the assembly because I was so shocked at how the majority ran everything and how partisanship it was, because I was used to being on the Brown School Board, and we all cared about the school district. We maybe had different opinions, but there was no winners and losers. It was all do what's best for the kids in the Brown School District and the taxpayers that elected us. When I got there, I found out what partisan politics was all about. And it's hardball. It's ugly, because there's a lot of people who put a lot of money in campaigns that want you there for a reason. And so I think the thing that really, like I say, surprised me is how hardball that business is. It's not for the faint of heart, and which is sad. And what has happened over time is good people just look at that and say, that isn't for me. I don't want to get beat up all the time at home or there. And so I won't say who we elect, but you can guess what I'm thinking. But because reasonable people just like, no, I couldn't do that. So many people talk to me and say, I could never do what you did, what your job was, because I see how they treated you, how that what goes on there, and I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, Luther, thank you so much for spending time with us and answering some of we had a lot of questions, so thank you. You're welcome to stay they're clapping. Yay!
I'm going to eat supper.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead, say hi to Joan for us. Eat your supper. You're always welcome to stay for our business meeting, because that's just tons of fun.
Yeah, I can tell. Have a good evening, guys. It was great to be with you.
Thank
Keep up the
you.
good work.